Let's talk about the San Antonio Spurs who finished runner-up in the NBA Finals. Derek, this is your time to get it all out. To If you want to reflect on the season, we can. If you want to look forward, we can. Because the future is still very bright with Victor Wembanyama, with Dylan Harper, who was a standout all playoffs long as a rookie. Stephon Castle continues to grow as a year two player. De'Aaron Fox on this team. You also have Keldon Johnson in that six-man role, Luke Cornett as a key piece off the bench, Devin Vassell, who has been a valuable role player for them. In the draft, they've got pick 20. They also have 35, 42, and 44 in the second round. I would be shocked if they make all those picks. We'll see if they sell some of them off, if they package them together, but that would be an interesting 10 pick sequence if the Spurs just blow through three selections. But in terms of free agents, they've got Harrison Barnes, who they will have to make a decision on after he did not play much of a role in the playoffs, but was a valuable piece for them. In fact, a starter during the regular season. So, how do you weigh that? Do you want to keep him around moving forward? I want to first reflect on this season and now removed from the NBA Finals and its conclusion, how you feel moving forward. Because it's very easy after you lose in the finals to feel like, God, it got away from us. But at the same time, this is a team that was not expected coming into the year to even be in contention to make the finals, much less be in games, have big leads in the NBA finals.
So I don't feel that much differently than I did when the finals ended. And that's just from the standpoint of I'm not the guy who's going to be like, fire Mitch Johnson, trade De'Aaron Fox. Everything's actually bad after making the NBA finals, with a bunch of 22-year-olds. That's just not how I view roster construction. It's not how I view basketball. What I will say, no one's gonna weep for me. I've had a
Yeah.
tremendous life being a Spurs fan. I have some other teams that have not been tremendous to me, so I know what pain is like. But as far as for my Spurs fandom, I don't for the most part. But what I will say is, by the time Game Five ended, I was exhausted because there was just so much media narrative bearing down on Spurs fans' heads, and it was just time for that season to conclude. And I do not view it as a missed opportunity because I just don't think the Spurs were good enough to win a championship this year. And the fact that they were able to get all the way to the NBA Finals with a roster that I do not feel was good enough to win the NBA championship this year, and that they actually tricked me into believing that they could win an NBA championship this year, which is,
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't. That's because there's at least, I don't know, a 5% chance that they actually could have done it. So but at the end of the day, they didn't have a power forward. They didn't have a starting four. They didn't have a backup big Luke Cornett's great, but he's only for certain matchups. They needed another style of backup big. That's why you have a Mason Plumlee, a Biombo on the roster. They're not playable, so you didn't actually play them, but that's what they're supposed to be for, is a different look. Kelly Olynyk. So they have some things to sure up. They have some roster holes that are just very obvious and very, very glaring. But the idea that you could get that far into the NBA playoffs, you could beat the defending champions. And I know the defending champions had some injuries that hampered them. But what I will also say about that is those are the same injuries that they had all year, and they were the best team in the league. So it's like
Mm-hmm.
it's still an accomplishment to knock out the defending champions with this roster that they had, which
Right.
frankly should not have been able to knock off the defending champions. They have some very obvious holes, and then the fact that De'Aaron Fox got hurt at the end of the season only made those holes even more glaring and even more necessary to fill. And so that's what they have to think about as they go forward. I think everything that they need is in front of them, and they have the opportunity to go and fix these holes. But as far as the season goes, it's a very successful season, and it shows them exactly what they need. I don't think the season could have gone any better short of actually pulling off the winning of the NBA championship.
Yeah. It's important, I think, to keep kind of the long view of a franchise when you have a player of Victor Wembanyama's talent on a rookie contract. And he got valuable experience. We learned a lot about Dylan Harper. We learned what Stephon Castle can and can't do in these big moments, at least at this point in his development. The interesting piece for me, though, is what we did or did not learn about De'Aaron Fox. What can we take away? What can be excused with the injury? And how do we feel about the three guard lineup, understanding that Harper's going to want a spot in this starting lineup and that you just gave Fox an extension for big, big money?
Yeah, the Fox extension, that is, as far as the Spurs getting lucky. That is the one thing that has happened to them that was just not very lucky, which is they got this, it, they got this incredible lucky thing where they got Harper, but they had already committed to get it to signing De'Aaron Fox, and so you have to follow through on that commitment, or it just starts this whole
Oh,
hullabaloo of
yeah.
things that are just not good. So it's just not the perfect situation, but it's also not bad, right? I think you were always heading towards a world where De'Aaron Fox had to be off your team eventually. Um, so that kind of sucks for De'Aaron Fox. I don't think that's what he wanted when he envisioned forcing his way to San Antonio. But I think even he would know that, all right, the math just doesn't math. Eventually I'm going to be traded. It's about what I can maximize before I get traded. And I think he maximized that this year pretty well until the end there. To your point, what you didn't really learn about this team is if De'Aaron Fox deserved to be the closer for this team. And that's what he needed to be at the end of this season. But whether it was mentally, physically, or both, you were not able to evaluate if he was able to actually do that because it started physically to a certain degree. It looked like it turned into a mental thing as well.
Mhm.
But then there's just also the realness of if you have bad ankles, you can't get the same lift on your jump shot, And he's just missing shots that he normally makes. Like I've watched him make. He's a high usage scoring guard, and he's not that efficient all the time, but he's much more efficient than what he was at the end of these playoffs. And he was just missing a lot of shots that he normally makes. Now, whether that's mental or injury or both, you really can't evaluate, and that is kind of a problem, especially going into next year.
Yeah. I think that the biggest, maybe not question, but the biggest difference maker this offseason that could happen is a De'Aaron Fox trade if you're the Spurs. But even and I make fun of you sometimes when the Fox, when the Fox struggles come up because you are in this position where everything's going right. But even this one thing that looked like it was the best thing that could happen to you, De'Aaron Fox forcing his way for next to nothing, has turned into the one thing you can kind of complain about and be like, that if only it was a power forward who forced his way to us, like everything would be perfect. And so I think it's going to be very interesting to see what the conversation is like and what the rumors about the Spurs are like. Because no, not every rumor is true, but rumors do shape how we kind of view how players hear about and start to understand what's going on. Because while, yes, some front offices are pretty transparent with their players, a lot of the players are kind of finding out what rumors are out there the same way that you and I are, if not from their agent, who is probably the one who spread the rumor online anyway. So you've got guys who are kind of hearing and feeling out what's going to happen. I don't expect it to get very loud on De'Aaron Fox and the Spurs this offseason, but if it starts to, I think that's a real good indication of this thing's coming sooner than later. We might start looking at it at this trade deadline rather than next offseason when I think would become a real conversation. But just to touch on the chance of moving De'Aaron Fox this offseason, I think given that you didn't really get to see what he would be at full health, whether he was being impacted by, like you said, the mental side of it, I don't think you can give up on that big of an asset at the value you would get for him this offseason, with people pointing to that big contract extension as a negative rather than a positive, and understanding that you've got three guards. So you're not going to demand top of market value for the guy who is quickly becoming third in that pecking order.
Yeah, well, there's three things that work here. A, you just never sell an asset at its lowest value if you don't have to, and the Spurs just really don't have to. B, having a three guard lineup just isn't a problem. Sign a four. You could play them all three. You can start all three if you need to. If you don't, you can. I think it's people are trying to make it seem like Harper's going to be in this big bad mood if he doesn't get to start. I think it's going to be fine if the sophomore guard doesn't get to start. I just don't think by the time it could, if he was going to force his way out, it would be in about 4 or 5 years. He's going to forget all about not starting as a sophomore. Now, De'Aaron Fox could become a victim to what we all say, what we just said about the Rockets, which is at a certain point, perception does become reality. And if those forces conspire against him, then all of a sudden you're looking at a De'Aaron Fox trade at the deadline. And that could happen. That's not off the table. But I just think in a perfect world, if things continue down the way where the chemistry continues to be what it's been and what you can rely upon, I just don't think you're going to see that. And then, I just don't think Dylan Harper is going to be ready to run this offense next season. I just think that's the reality of it. If you trade De'Aaron Fox, you're just not going to win the NBA title next year. And this is just what it is. De'Aaron Fox provides a function that they still need. And that's what I don't think people understand. It's not that De'Aaron Fox is doing these things and they're just forcing it down our throats because he's De'Aaron Fox. They're forcing it down their throats because when they doesn't play, you see what the offense looks like against an Oklahoma City in game 1 and game 2. And it looks barely functional, besides the fact that, Victor Wembanyama is going for 40 in game 1. So all that to say is he still serves a role that you need. You're really not going to get back what you want from him at this point anyway. And you do actually have a problem for now. Now, if there becomes a problem, then you have a problem. You deal with it at that time. But for now, you don't actually have a problem.
Yeah. And let's be honest, it's easier to push Champagnie to the bench group and run 3 guards. And then like starting lineups matter. I'm not going to pretend they don't. I know some people love to be like, it's what the finishing lineup that matters. No, the starting lineup matters, but you can finagle it however you need to get things done there. Let's get to your trade as we wrap up this offseason series here.
So if anyone who watches us faithfully will remember that I did not want to send this person to Oklahoma City. And that was specifically because I did not want them to be in Oklahoma City, but it was also because I wanted them to be a San Antonio Spur. And so, as much as this pains me to do, because the person that I'm trading is one of my favorite Spurs players currently, I had to defend him tooth and nail last year because he was injured and fans were coming after him. I'm sending Devin Vassell and 3 first-round picks to the New Orleans Pelicans for one Trey Murphy.
That's a very interesting one. I do like that. I don't think it really addresses your power forward concern, but I do think that, like I said, lineup versatility. I think that Murphy can fit into kind of the same mold that Champagnie has. Vassell, to your point, like if you're going to play 3 guys who can play point guard, you don't really need a guy who plays pretty much exclusively shooting guard. I think it's a pretty solid trade. Yes, you're giving up quite a bit in terms of assets, but that's going to be the price for a guy like Trey Murphy. You look at the Knicks, Anunoby cost a bunch of draft picks. Bridges cost a bunch of draft picks. Sometimes it's not your star player that's going to cost you the most. It's the guy who is that finishing piece, that versatile guy in your lineup is the one that might cost you the most assets as you get right there to the edge of title contention. And Derek, that trade is going to do it for our off-season preview series. Thank you to everyone who listened to 30 teams. If you listen to just your team, we appreciate you coming along as well.